For context, I did not grow up in a good area. I won't give the location for privacy reasons, but I live in a fairly large city. At the time, I was around 10 or 11 years old. This was overall not a good area. Lots of gang activity, drug use, and that kind of stuff. One of those neighborhoods with the jacked up sidewalks and shopping carts strewn everywhere. There was a park a couple blocks from my house, and I decided to go on a run and spend some time there on my own. I don't know why, but I was allowed to leave on my own. Knowing the area, it was still light out when I jogged down there, but it started getting dark when I reached the park. It was around dusk. The layout of the park was a big rectangle basically. It faced long ways, so the shorter side was where the gate was. There was a set of swings at the very front, and I sat down to hang out there for a bit. At the time, I didn't have a phone with service, I just had music downloaded to listen to. I was sitting with my earbuds in and just got this really awful feeling. It felt like a tingling on my back, and I knew something was up. I took one earbud out and kept swinging, but I couldn't shake that feeling. Finally, I turned around to check behind me. There was an alleyway leading into the park that was curved so you could see part of the way down. It was all white gravel. Down the alley was a dumpster. There was a figure on the ground with a ton of red stuff around him, which I know was blood, and another guy standing walking towards me fast. The alley was across the playground, about 40 feet maybe. As soon as I saw the man approaching me, I dipped the heck out of there. He had something in his hand that I couldn't see, but he was holding it like a knife or a pair of scissors. I sprinted a couple blocks back to my house and got in through the back to make sure no one saw me. I didn't tell my dad until years later, and he fully believed me. That area is bad news, and I'm amazed something bad didn't happen to me with how much I was outside alone. This happened nearly 20 years ago when I was 5 years old. My family lived in a trailer park and I basically had free reign to roam around as long as I wanted, as I didn't actually leave the trailer park. One rainy day, a friend and I decided to meet at a playground in the center of the trailer park and hang out. Usually we would have stayed on the playground, but for some reason that day, we felt like just walking around seeing what kind of adventures we could get ourselves into. This ended up being an awful idea, and the adventure we had was not fun in the slightest. Due to the rain, there weren't a lot of people hanging around outside that day, so the streets we were walking down were pretty much empty. At one point, however, a car pulls up next to us. The driver was a thin guy with a mustache. In the passenger seat was a much bigger bald man. They both looked old enough to be my dad. The driver rolls down his window and looks up and down. Aren't you kids a little young to be walking around by yourselves? I should preface by saying this at this point in time. I hadn't quite grasped the concept of stranger danger yet. I obliviously smiled at him and replied, "Nope, my mom says I can go anywhere I want in the park." My friend kicked me, and when I shot around and asked her what the problem was, she had a serious look on her face and was shaking her head no. Luckily, my friend was way smarter than I am and already knew what the concept of stranger danger. The driver continues, "Well, you might get sick if you stay out in this rain too long. Why don't you let us give you a ride home?" My friend shook her head at the man, "No thank you." She then proceeds to grab my hand and starts pulling me away, moving ever so slightly faster than our previous pace. The car slowly crept right next to us. The driver wasn't giving up that easily. "Really, I insist. Wouldn't you want to catch a cold?" My friend kept pulling me forward and without even looking at him replied in a slightly firmer tone, "No thank you, we're fine." She started walking even faster, me finally picking up on her energy and matching her pace to hers. Then we heard a car door open. I quickly took a glance back and saw that the larger man was getting out of the car. My panic mode kicked in. I shouted, "Run!" I turned to start running through the grass and in between people's trailers. I heard my friend running directly behind me. We didn't have an idea where we were running to. We just knew we had to get away from those men. After a bit, we saw her teenage cousin's trailer. We sprinted to it and burst through the door. Luckily, they were home and it was unlocked. We locked the door behind us and frantically looked around the windows, breathing a sigh of relief when we saw no sign of the men or their car. My friend's cousin ran into the room and upon seeing us breathing heavily and clutching our chests, asked us what the heck was going on. My friend told her everything that happened. She told us to sit down on the couch and relax a bit, just happy we were all right. We did end up staying there for a few hours watching movies. Her cousin then drove us to our respective homes, telling us she doesn't want us walking around without a grown-up or a bigger kid like her anymore. I absolutely had no protests. I never saw those two men again, and at the age of 23, I still sometimes lose sleep wondering what would have happened if my friend hadn't been so smart, or if we hadn't been able to outrun those men. Every day I walk home from school with my friend because she lives only a little bit away from me, so our routes line up. At the start of the school year, we noticed there was a man actually looking at us from his window while we were walking home from school. Found it a little weird, but ultimately didn't think much of it. A few months ago, after the heat of summer died down a bit, he started sitting out on his porch when we were walking by. Usually he would just smile at us. Sometimes I smiled back, but I usually just ignored him. One day, as I was walking by his house, he waved at me from where he was sitting. I stopped and waved back at him and told him to have a nice afternoon as I walked past. It felt a little weird because he didn't reply, but eventually I forgot about the whole thing. Once when my mother was at work and I was alone at our house, I noticed him walking past my house several times through my window. I felt very creeped out and uncomfortable. I considered talking to my parents about it just in case, but I ultimately convinced myself that he wasn't doing anything wrong, so it didn't really matter. Yesterday, I walked home from school alone because I stayed behind with some other kids outside the school for a few hours since we had art club that day, and I didn't want to walk home just to have to come back fairly soon after. I had just bought myself a nice pair of wired headphones a few weeks with money I've been saving up for a long time since I don't have a job. I was playing them over one year as I was walking home. On my way home, there is this public lot with a stable on it that I like to cut through to get to my yard as quick as I can rather than walking around the property. Sometimes people like to hang out around it to meet up, but there wasn't anyone on it that I could see. As I rounded a corner on the stables, someone grabbed the back of my shirt. From the way they were grabbing it, I could see a part of their hand. I jerked forward and they grabbed the top part of my headphones. The wire was at the bottom part of my neck and it got stuck for a moment, and I remember feeling as if I couldn't get away and that something very bad was going to happen. The wire eventually snapped and I took off running as fast as I could, screaming. They let go of my shirt and I eventually hopped the half fence onto our property, and I ran as fast as I could onto the sidewalk in front of my house because I was worried that I would take too long on the lock if they were following me. By the time I actually got to the sidewalk point, I was crying and I felt like I could collapse because I was so scared. When I looked over my shoulder, I couldn't see anyone, but I kept running until I reached my friend's house in case whoever was there could still see, and when I got there, I was in tears and it took a bit of explanation for the situation because they couldn't understand me. I tried calling my mother, but she wouldn't pick up the phone. My friend's mom called the police and they came to check things out. There was nobody at the stable, and they told me that it was most likely some kid trying to mess around, but they escorted me home where my mother was waiting for me anyways. I didn't tell them about the old man because I was worried they would think I was crazy considering he hadn't technically done anything. But there's something in my mind that kept telling me that it was him who grabbed me at the stables. When I was walking home from school today, I brought a screwdriver with me in case I needed to defend myself. I also had my friend with me. My mother offered to pick me up from school, but I was worried that if I hadn't shown how the encounter had affected me, then it would make things worse. I also avoided the stables and my friend made sure I made it to the door. The guy on his porch wasn't there today, and I'm still not fully sure if it's him or not. I feel terrible that my headphones broke, but I can't help but wonder what would have happened if they didn't.